Ilias Mercer shivered as the alien sun dipped below Veridia's violet horizon. The expedition's atmospheric models hadn't predicted the sudden temperature drop or the electrical storm that had separated him from his research team. 6 hours of wandering had left him with a twisted ankle, depleted oxygen reserves, and the sinking realization that his emergency beacon wasn't functioning in the mineral-rich highlands. "Botany," he muttered, adjusting his portable specimen container with 30 new plant samples. "Should have specialized in navigation instead." A flash of movement caught his eye, something darting between the bioluminescent fungi that dotted the landscape like blue stepping stones. Not animal, not plant. The silhouette was unmistakably bipedal. Ilias froze. First contact with Veridia's elusive sentient species wasn't supposed to happen like this. Alone, injured, without the diplomatic team's protocols or translation software. The figure stumbled into a clearing, moonlight revealing a slender form with skin the color of burnished copper. Distinctive ridge-like patterns flowed along exposed arms, glowing faintly with an internal light. The alien, clearly female in form, clutched her side where a dark substance seeped between long fingers. She was wounded, and she was being pursued. The distant sound of guttural calls echoed through the forest. The alien woman's head snapped toward the noise, her entirely golden eyes widening in fear. Their gazes locked across the clearing. Neither moved. "I won't hurt you," Ilias said softly, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone might convey peaceful intentions. The alien woman tilted her head, then gestured urgently toward a rocky outcropping. When Ilias hesitated, she made the motion again, more insistent. The calls of her pursuers grew louder. Instinct took over. Ilias nodded and followed her swift, limping form toward what turned out to be the mouth of a narrow cave. Inside, the alien woman collapsed against the wall, her breathing labored. Up close, Ilias could see the wound was worse than he'd initially thought, a deep gash across her ribs that pulsed with each breath. Ilias rummaged through his field kit. "I don't know if human medical supplies will help you, but infection is probably universal." The alien watched warily as he extracted antiseptic and bandages. When he gestured toward her wound, she hesitated, then gave a single, sharp nod. As Ilias leaned forward to apply the antiseptic, the rock beneath him shifted. He lost his balance, his hand slicing against a sharp stone as he fell forward. Their blood mingled at the point where his cut hand pressed against her wounded side. The sensation was immediate and electric, a burning that raced up his arm and spread throughout his body. The alien woman hissed in surprise, her golden eyes widening as she stared at the point where their blood mixed. What's happening?" Ilias gasped, trying to pull away but finding himself frozen by the intensity of the sensation. The alien woman gripped his wrist, holding their wounds together as the burning subsided into a strange, rhythmic pulse. She spoke for the first time, her voice melodic but the words incomprehensible. Then, astonishingly, Ilias understood a single word forming in his mind. Impossible. Outside, the hunters passed by their hiding place, their calls fading into the distance. But the greater danger now lay in what had just happened between them, a biological impossibility that would change everything. The alien woman released his wrist and touched her own wound, which had stopped bleeding. She looked at Ilias with what could only be described as awe and whispered what he somehow knew was her name. "Thea." "Ilias," he responded, touching his chest with his uninjured hand, trying to ignore the strange new sensation buzzing beneath his skin. Whatever had just happened, there was no going back. The underground settlement of the Veridians sprawled through a network of crystalline caverns, illuminated by the same bioluminescence that Ilias had observed in the forest. 3 days had passed since Thea had brought him here, days filled with curious stares and whispered conversations he couldn't understand. "Your blood should have killed me," Thea explained through the rudimentary translation device the Veridian scientists had provided. "And mine should have poisoned you. Incompatible species always reject." They sat in what Ilias had come to understand was their medical research chamber. Around them, Veridian scientists moved with purpose, their copper skin marked with varying patterns of luminescent ridges, family lineages, Thea had explained. "But we didn't reject," Ilias said, watching as a scanner passed over his arm, projecting images of his cellular structure onto a crystalline screen. "Why?" The lead scientist, Kavar, an elder Viridian with deep-set golden eyes and faded ridges, studied the projection. The markers in your DNA, they're adapting, integrating with Viridian genetic material rather than fighting it. Is that normal? Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. Nothing about this is normal, Thea replied. Her wound had healed with remarkable speed after their blood had mingled. Our people are dying, Elias. For generations, our genetic code has been degrading. Each generation is born weaker with more defects. Kavar manipulated the projection, enlarging a strand of DNA. See how your cells have created a bridge structure between human and Viridian DNA. This has never been documented before. What does it mean for me? Elias asked, flexing his hand. Since the incident, he'd noticed changes: enhanced night vision, increased sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, a strange awareness of the bioluminescent life forms around him. It means you're becoming something new, Kavar said gravely, neither fully human nor Viridian. A commotion at the chamber entrance interrupted them. A group of Viridians entered, led by Merax, a broad-shouldered male whose ridge patterns pulsed with angry red light. This outsider should not be here, Merax announced, pointing at Elias. The council must decide his fate. The council already knows he saved my life, Thea countered, stepping protectively toward Elias. And what of the changes in him? Merax challenged. Our sacred genetic line contaminated by alien blood. Our sacred genetic line is killing us, Kavar interrupted. Look at these readings. The human's DNA is stabilizing the deterioration. The revelation silenced the chamber. Elias felt the weight of countless golden eyes upon him. If what Kavar says is true, Thea said softly, Elias might be the answer we've been searching for. That night, Elias stood on a balcony overlooking the central cavern of the settlement. Below, Viridians went about their lives, unaware that their future might rest in his altered blood. They're afraid, Thea said, joining him. Some believe you're a savior sent by the ancestors. Others fear you'll destroy what remains of our identity. And what do you believe? Elias asked, nodding how the luminescent patterns on her skin seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat now. I believe in survival, she answered simply, and hope. As she spoke, Elias felt a strange sensation ripple through his body. The bioluminescent plants decorating the balcony suddenly brightened, responding to him. Thea gasped. Your skin, she whispered. Elias looked down to see faint, glowing patterns emerging along his forearms, patterns that mirrored Thea's own familial ridges. It's happening faster than we thought, she said, reaching out to trace the patterns with a trembling finger. The transformation. I'm becoming like you, Elias said, a mixture of wonder and fear in his voice. No, Thea corrected. You're becoming something neither world has seen before, and that makes you either our greatest hope or our greatest danger. Elias stood perfectly still as Kavar examined the luminescent patterns now covering much of his body. In the weeks since they'd first appeared, the ridges had grown more pronounced, pulsing with a blue-white light that responded to his emotions. Extraordinary, Kavar murmured. Your human DNA remains intact, yet it's incorporating Viridian genetic expressions perfectly. The neural adaptations are particularly fascinating. Neural adaptations? Elias questioned, wincing as another headache flared behind his eyes, the third today. Your brain is developing new pathways, Kavar explained, similar to our ability to sense and communicate with bioluminescent life forms. Thea entered the laboratory, her expression tense. The council is divided. Merax has gained support for his position that Elias represents contamination rather than cure. How can they think that when? Elias began, but stopped as a wave of sensation crashed over him. Suddenly, he could feel every bioluminescent organism in the cavern, their energy signatures vibrating against his consciousness like strings on an instrument. Elias, Thea's voice seemed distant. He raised his hand, focusing on a cluster of fungi growing along the wall. To his astonishment, the organisms responded, their glow intensifying, patterns shifting in response to his thoughts. He's manifesting communion, Kavar whispered in awe. The ability our ancestors possessed to communicate with Viridia's ecosystem. No one has demonstrated this ability for generations. Thea touched Elias' shoulder, bringing him back to himself. This proves what your blood might do for our people. Or what it might unleash, came Merax's voice from the doorway. He stood with a group of supporters, their ridge patterns pulsing with synchronous alarm. The human manipulates life energy without training, without understanding our ways. I'm not trying to, Elias started. The hunters who pursued Thea have tracked her to our settlement, Merax interrupted. They arrive by nightfall. If they find an alien abomination wielding communion, they'll destroy us all. Alarm rippled through the room. The hunters belonged to a fundamentalist faction of Veridians who believed genetic purity, even in its deteriorating state, was sacred. We must move Elias to safety, Thea insisted. No, Elias said, surprising himself. I won't bring danger to your people and then run. If this transformation is happening for a reason, maybe it's so I can help. Before anyone could respond, a thunderous explosion rocked the cavern. Dust and crystals rained from the ceiling. They're early, Merax growled. Chaos erupted as Veridians rushed to defensive positions. Elias followed Thea toward the cavern's central chamber, where dozens of frightened civilians gathered. Stay here, Thea ordered, drawing a weapon from her belt. Another explosion shook the settlement. Cracks spiderwebbed across the crystalline ceiling above the civilians. Elias looked up in horror as a massive section began to give way. Without thinking, he raised his hands. The bioluminescent patterns on his body flared brilliantly as he reached out with his newfound sense, connecting to the living crystals embedded in the rock. He felt their structure, their growth patterns, and somehow he redirected them. Before the astonished eyes of the gathered Veridians, the falling ceiling section stabilized, new crystal growth rapidly forming a latticework of support. Exhausted, Elias collapsed to his knees. The civilians stared at him in silence. Then, from the entrance tunnel, armed hunters poured into the chamber. At their head was a scarred Veridian whose ridge patterns were deliberately obscured by ceremonial paint. "Where is the abomination?" the leader demanded. Merax stepped forward, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Elias thought he would be betrayed. Instead, Merax pointed to the newly formed crystal structure overhead. "There is no abomination here," he said firmly. "Only Veridians protecting their home." The hunter leader scanned the crowd, his gaze finally settling on Elias, who couldn't hide the glowing patterns on his skin. "What is this creature?" he snarled. "He is the future," Thea declared, stepping between Elias and the hunters. "And if you want him, you'll have to go through all of us." One by one, the Veridians moved to stand with Thea, even Merax. The hunters, outnumbered, backed toward the entrance. "This isn't over," their leader warned. "The contamination must be purged." After they retreated, Merax approached Elias. "You saved many lives today." "I don't understand what's happening to me," Elias admitted. "Neither do we," Kavar said. "But there is one place that might hold answers, the ancestral pools." Thea gasped. "No one has visited the pools in generations." "What are they?" Elias asked. "Sacred sites containing pure genetic material from our ancestors," Kavar explained. "If anything can explain your adaptation and how it might save us, it's there." "Then that's where we need to go," Elias said, looking at Thea, whose golden eyes reflected both fear and determination. "The hunters will be watching for us," she warned. "I know," Elias replied, "but some risks are worth taking." The journey across Veridia's wilderness had taken 3 grueling days. Elias, Thea, and a small group including Kavar and, surprisingly, Merax, had traveled under cover of darkness to avoid the hunters. They now stood at the edge of the Chasm of Whispers, a vast gorge that separated them from their destination. "The ancestral pools lie on the far side," Thea explained, pointing to distant, mist-shrouded mountains. "No one has crossed this chasm in living memory." Elias surveyed the seemingly impassable gap. His transformation had accelerated during their journey. The luminescent patterns now covered his entire body, and his senses had expanded beyond anything human. He could feel the ancient bioluminescent vines that clung to the chasm walls, dormant but not dead. "I think I can wake them," he said quietly. "Wake what?" Merax asked, his earlier hostility tempered by the days of difficult travel. Instead of answering, Elias knelt at the cliff edge, placing his palms against the ground. He closed his eyes, extending his consciousness into the network of life energy that permeated Veridia's ecosystem. "The bridge vines," Kavar realized, watching as Elias' patterns brightened. They're mentioned in the oldest texts, but they've been dormant for centuries. Beneath them, something stirred. Ancient vines, thick as tree trunks and laced with dormant bioluminescence, began to twitch and unfurl from the chasm walls. Under Elia's gentle guidance, they stretched across the gap, weaving together into a living bridge. "Impossible," Merax whispered. Elias opened his eyes, sweat beading on his forehead. "Not impossible, just forgotten." They crossed carefully, the bridge undulating slightly beneath their weight. On the far side, they entered a forest unlike any Elias had seen, trees with crystalline trunks that hummed with energy, flowers that sang soft melodies when touched. "The ancestral gardens," Thea said reverently, "the birthplace of our species." As they progressed deeper into the forest, Elias felt a strange pull, as if something was calling specifically to him. His headaches returned with greater intensity, accompanied by flashes of memories that weren't his own. Ancient Viridians, their ridge patterns complex and bright, communing with the planet in ways their descendants had lost. "Something's wrong," Kavar observed, noticing Elias' distress. "The human part of you is struggling against the Viridian elements." "I'm fine," Elias insisted, though he knew it was a lie. His body was becoming a battleground between two genetic legacies. They made camp at the forest's edge, the pools visible in the valley below, 7 circular bodies of luminous blue liquid that pulsed in perfect synchrony. That night, as the others slept, Thea found Elias sitting apart, his patterns flickering erratically. "You're in pain," she said, not a question but a statement. "The transformation is accelerating," he admitted. "Kavar thinks my human biology is fighting back." Thea sat beside him, her own patterns shifting to match his rhythm, a gesture of connection among her people. "Why did you really come with us, Elias? You could have asked to be returned to your expedition." "At first, I just wanted to understand what was happening to me," he said after a long pause. "But now, I've seen your people, their struggles, their hope. How could I walk away?" "Even if saving us means losing yourself?" she asked softly. Elias looked down at his transformed body. "Maybe I'm not losing myself. Maybe I'm becoming who I was meant to be." Thea's hand found his, their patterns harmonizing where they touched. "There's something I haven't told you about the pools." "What's that?" "The ancient texts say they contain the pure essence of what we once were, before the deterioration. If you enter them, the change might become permanent. You might never be fully human again." Elias stared at the glowing pools in the distance. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll eventually stabilize somewhere between human and Viridian. But the cure for my people might remain beyond reach." The weight of choice settled on Elias' shoulders. Before he could respond, Merax's urgent voice cut through the night. "Hunters, they've found us." They scrambled to their feet as dark figures emerged from the forest. The hunters had tracked them, just as Merax had feared. "Get to the pools," Kavar urged Elias and Thea. "We'll hold them off." As Merax and Kavar engaged the hunters, Elias and Thea ran down the slope toward the glowing pools. Behind them, energy weapons flashed in the darkness. "Whatever you decide," Thea said as they reached the edge of the nearest pool, "know that you've already given us more hope than we've had in generations." Elias looked into her golden eyes, then back at the luminous liquid that might forever change him, or save a dying species. "Some choices," he said, echoing his words from days before, "are worth the risk." The sound of pursuit grew closer. Time was running out. The ancestral pool glowed before Elias, its surface rippling with patterns that matched those now covering his body. Around them, the sounds of battle grew closer as Kavar and Merax fought to hold off the hunters. "You don't have to do this," Thea said, her golden eyes searching his. "We can find another way." Elias smiled sadly. "We both know there isn't time." The leader of the hunters appeared at the ridge above, his scarred face twisted with hatred. "Stop the contamination!" he roared, aiming his weapon at Elias. Before he could fire, Elias stepped forward and plunged into the pool. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, like being unmade and rebuilt simultaneously. Every cell in his body resonated with the ancient genetic material suspended in the liquid. Memories not his own flooded his consciousness. The early days of Viridian civilization, the gradual onset of the genetic deterioration, the desperate attempts to halt it. Beneath the surface, Elias understood. The Viridians hadn't always been separate from Viridia's ecosystem. They had once been its guardians, their genetic code intertwined with the planet itself. The deterioration had begun when they'd severed that connection, seeking advancement beyond their world. And somehow, impossibly, his human DNA contained elements that could bridge that ancient gap. On the surface, Thea watched in horror as Elia's form became translucent, his very molecular structure seeming to dissolve. The pool's glow intensified until it was painful to look at directly. The hunters reached the edge of the pools, weapons ready. "What have you done?" their leader demanded. "What was necessary," Thea replied, tears streaming down her face. The pool suddenly stilled, its surface becoming mirror-smooth. Then, from its depths, a figure emerged, recognizable as Elia's, yet fundamentally changed. His skin was now a mosaic of human flesh and crystalline viridian structures. The luminescent patterns had transformed into intricate circuitry that flowed across his body. His eyes, once brown, now shimmered with the same golden light as the viridians, but with flecks of humanity still visible within. "The transformation is complete," he said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made the very air vibrate. The hunter leader raised his weapon, but stopped as Elias lifted his hand. Every bioluminescent organism in the valley responded, creating a network of light that connected everything: plants, crystals, viridians, even the hunters themselves. "Can you feel it?" Elias asked. "The connection we all share." Through the network, he shared what he had learned in the pool: how the viridian's genetic deterioration could be reversed by reconnecting with Viridia's ecosystem, how his human DNA had somehow provided the missing link. One by one, the hunters lowered their weapons, overcome by the shared consciousness Elias had created. "This is what we lost," the hunter leader whispered, looking at his hands where faint new patterns were already beginning to form. "What our ancestors knew." Kava approached cautiously. "The cure." "Not a cure," Elias corrected. "A remembering. Your bodies know how to heal themselves, they've just forgotten how." He stepped from the pool, liquid still dripping from his transformed body. When he reached Thea, he took her hands in his. Where they touched, her faded patterns brightened, the deterioration in her genetic code already beginning to reverse. "It will take time," he explained to the gathered Viridians. "Generations, perhaps, but the path is clear now." "And you," Thea asked, her voice breaking, "what happens to you now?" Elias looked down at his transformed self, neither fully human nor Viridian. "I can never return to Earth, not like this, but perhaps that was never my destiny." 3 months later, Elias stood on the highest peak overlooking the renamed Valley of Renewal. Below, Viridians from all factions had gathered, even former hunters, drawn by the healing potential of the reawakened pools. Thea joined him, her ridge patterns now bright and complex as those of the ancients in the memories he had shared. "The first children are being born with stable genetics," she reported. "Strong, connected to Viridia in ways we had lost." "And your people, do they still see me as an abomination?" Elias asked. "They see you as what you are, a bridge between worlds." She took his hand, their patterns synchronizing instantly. "As do I." In the distance, an Earth expedition ship descended through the atmosphere. The first diplomatic mission following the remarkable transmission Elias had sent explaining his transformation and the new relationship possible between humans and Viridians. "Are you ready?" Thea asked. Elias nodded, feeling the pulse of Viridia beneath his feet and the echo of Earth still in his heart. A bridge needs to connect to both shores. Together, they descended toward the landing site, where two worlds would meet, and perhaps, in time, understand that difference didn't have to mean division, that sometimes the most unexpected bonds could heal what seemed broken beyond repair. As the ship's door opened, Elias' patterns brightened, a living testament to the truth he now embodied. That transformation, however frightening, could lead to rebirth.